common questions I get. Like, hey, how come you're not using version X or version Y? Why aren't you doing that? Well, there's two reasons. Number one, from a learning standpoint, Django doesn't actually change that much. So I always recommend that you stick with the version that's in the video, whether it's my video or not, or the book, whether it's my book or not. Stick with that version because then you'll be able to understand the concepts and not get lost because of these minor things that happen when it comes to versions. Sure, there are major things that can happen and they do happen, but as you're learning, those things are not really that important. If you're advanced, what you'll do is you'll go to the documentation and read the change log and see the things that have changed, or the release notes and see the things that have changed and just go off of that. That's what you would do once you get that familiarity. Now, I realize it's probably a good idea to see how to actually upgrade a project, and that's what we're going to do now. We are going to upgrade a Django 1.11 project to the latest version of Django, which is Django 2.0.4. Now, one of the key things here when you think about upgrading is you want to look for the LTS, or the long-term support version, because that one will last much longer than any other kind of version. And we can find this out by jumping on djangoproject.com/download. Of course, you'll see the different options for getting the latest official release. But if you scroll down, what you'll see is a release schedule. This schedule shows you what projects or which version of the project will be released and when it will be released and when it loses support or long-term support. So Django 1.11 as of now, and also until the first quarter or the first part of the year 2020, so a couple years from now, literally 2 years from now, Django 1.11 will be supported until then. Django 2.0, on the other hand, will be supported for 1 year from now. Not 2 years, one. So Django 1.11 is an LTS and it's supported a lot longer. That doesn't mean we won't show you how to upgrade, because I think as a learning exercise, it's really good to see an old version to a new version. So this isn't always true. It's not always as difficult to upgrade to a new version as something like Django. Django is just a massive project. So yeah, when they make changes and you're a beginner and you try to jump to a newer version, it's possible that you're going to run into some issues where you wouldn't run into those issues using some other packages. So I don't know if this applies for every Python thing. I'm pretty sure it doesn't, but it definitely applies to Django because it's something I get asked about all the time. So without further ado, let's actually get the project that we're going to be working in to upgrade, and then we'll actually grab the code as well. So the project we're using is DJANGO, the DJANGO tutorial series version 1.11. Now we have a few other DJANGO series out there, but I want to use version 1.11, which is available on our YouTube channel, which is simply joincfe.com/YouTube. You can go there and you can look for that DJANGO tutorial series for version 1.11. And that's a long, very comprehensive series to teach you about Django. Sure, it uses version 1.11, but it teaches you about Django, and that's why I recommend that you watch that first prior to jumping into this in the upgrading process. And of course, that is also, that code that we write in there is available on our GitHub. So joincfe.com/GitHub will have all of that code, and that's actually what we're going to be working with now. So I'll open up that code, joincfe.com/GitHub, then the DJANGO 1.11 portion, and I'm going to go ahead and copy this Git link. Now, if you're not familiar with Git, just go ahead and download this code and then navigate to it. Me, on the other hand, I am familiar with Git, and so I'm going to go into my dev folder here, and I'll just go ahead and do make dir DJANGO 1.11, as in DJANGO 1.11, and then I'll change into that directory DJANGO 1.11, and then I'll do git clone that actual link there and enter. So I'm just literally copying everything from that project. And then what I'll do is create a virtual environment And I'm using Python 3 here, even though I'm not declaring it because I'm using my Windows computer. So I go ahead and hit enter. Notice it says Python 3.6. That's the version I'm using. I actually think that might be critical for DJANGO 1.11, which while it's running, I'm going to just jump into the code real quick to see if it is. So into the src folder, I'm looking for a runtime file, and I actually don't have a runtime file in here, so I'm not positive if what version it is. Now, of course, if you went through that series recently, or you actually you went through it recently and you know what version we use, please let us know in the comments. I don't think that the version of Python is that important, except for the fact that it's version 3. So it might be 3.5 or 3.6. Either way, you're going to want to stick with Python 3. Now, here's another thing about versions as well, is Python 2 versus Python 3. Those are significantly different in minor areas. Overall, they're not. They're actually very, very similar, except for in those minor areas where they're very significantly different. And also, Python 3 is going to be the future of Python until Python 4 comes out, which will probably change a number of things as well. But as it relates to Django, Python 3 is the only one that's going to be supported in the future. So if you're moving to Django 2.0 like we're about to do, you have to use Python 3. Otherwise, it just simply will not work. I'm going to let this finish installing, and then once it's finished, we will install the requirements for it. Okay, now it's done. Let's go ahead and activate the virtual environment with scripts/activate. And if you're on Mac or Linux, you would do source bin/activate like that. That's what you would do. Okay, so now that we're in here, we have a bunch of things going on. We have a Sublime file, and we also have an src folder. Those are the sort of main things that we need to worry about here. So I'm going to navigate to my dev folder where I just put DJANGO 1.11 and open up this Sublime file, which is called MUI Picky. So again, going back into what that project was, it was just a name for the project. It doesn't actually matter. So I'm going to go ahead and close out any other open files. And now I'm going to do the process of actually upgrading. So I'm going to first do pip install src, so src, sorry, -r src/requirements.txt. So what this is going to do is install the requirements related to that project. You might be familiar with that, you might not be, but the point is just literally installing everything that that project has in there. Some things might fail, which we'll address if it does, but overall it should install just fine. And while that's happening, we're going to look at the Django version 2.0 blog post that we created back in December to actually talk about Django version 2.0. So these are some of the things from the release notes, right? These are just things that I noticed that are common themes that we might have issues with in our project. So of course that's available at this URL right here. So make sure you go to check that out, or you can just go to the blog, our blog at joincfe.com/projects and search for Django version 2.0, and it'll show you these things. We'll also have that linked in the description below. Okay, so first and foremost, is authenticated. So on any of your views, not in your templates, but any of your views, if you have request.user.isAuthenticated, it's no longer a method, it is now a property. Yep, that's it. It's now a property. That's not really that big of a deal, but it is something that just seemed to just come out of nowhere. I mean, it didn't, but it seemed to come out of nowhere, and we didn't get warnings about it. We didn't do anything like that. But once they switched to Django 2.0, boom, we now have to do is authenticated as a method or an instance method instead of, or rather an instance property method instead of the actual instance method. So that's actually not really that big of a deal. But while that installs, let's go into our project. And I'm using Sublime Text for this. You can use any text editor, but basically what we want to do is we want to find and replace everything that is related to this. So if you go to find and then find in files, here you've got a find and replace method here. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to go ahead and add a folder. And of course, the folder that I'm going to be using is the DJANGO 1.11 and the src folder. We'll select that one. And all I'm going to do is go back into my code here. Is I'm going to look for is authenticated, not the whole string, but just is authenticated, just like that, and change it just like that. Okay, so I'm going to run replace, and I have 4 occurrences across 2 files. We hit yes. I'm going to hit save and save. Okay, so let's check our installation process. Everything looks good. I'm also now going to do pip install Django equals to 2.0.4. I'll hit enter. That's going to install, obviously install the latest version of Django, but the reason I declared the version has to do with when you're watching this, because if Django version 2.1 is out, there might be some different changes that we're not really accounting for here. So the point of this is to show you how to switch to different versions, not so much to get the absolute latest version, which may happen soon, it may not. Yeah, so check that release schedule for that, depending on when you're watching. Okay, so now it's downloading, it's installing, it's uninstalling Django 1.11. So we'll go ahead and go to the next thing. The next thing is reverse. The reverse method has moved. So I'm going to go ahead and search for all instances of this reverse method. And I'm not going to replace anything this time. I'll just click find, and I have 3 examples of it. And what did it replace to? Well, it replaced to being inside of URLs. That's a lot more simple. So it's simply Django.urls, import reverse, and we can just go down the list here and manually write them in. Sometimes it's a good idea to manually write them in. In this case, it's probably not necessary, but I'm going to do it just because other things are installing right now anyway, and it's only 3 things. The other reason to do this is really to make sure that you're not just blanketly replacing code. Like in the is authenticated method, it's possible that I made other errors for myself. So I would imagine that actually doing that one single search and then going line by line, it might in the long run be better for you. Okay, so now I have Django version 2.0.4 working. Let's go into my SRC folder here. And I'll just go ahead and run python manage.py migrate. See if there's any errors. Yes, I get errors. I get the init method is missing 1 positional argument. So there's a new argument that's required that, well, it's called onDelete in this case. And you might not have any idea what this is for. And that's okay, because maybe you don't know about the fact that foreign keys you have to now add onDelete. Like you have to tell Django what to do with it as you delete it. So how do we do this now? This is our next one. We'll search for foreign keys. So foreign key actually, so it's a foreign key field. So we want to find all of this in files. So back to find files, Control-Shift-F is a quick way to get there. So just foreign key, and it's most likely going to be foreign key field. It's not in this migrations. Notice in the migrations, though, it does have this onDelete method here. Now, of course, that's related specifically to the default, right? So it actually, you now have to declare what the default is. That's essentially what they're saying. In old versions, they just made the default for you, which was just delete everything. So let's go ahead and jump into the first one, foreign key for the user model. So basically what this is asking, do you want to delete this entire model instance or the object itself if the user is deleted? Or do you want to set it to null or something different? So what I'm going to do is I'm going to just come in here and say null equals to true, and we'll say onDelete equals to, and this is going to be models.set_null. So models is coming from the import of models. And that's how we can do it. You could also do it something similar to that, most likely, but models.setNull is there. That's what we would end up doing. And the next thing would be also that restaurant location. So the next foreign key right below it. Let's just separate these things out a little. I might want to do that exact same thing. I'm actually not sure. So if you're not sure, setting it being to null is fine, or you can set it to being cascade. There are other options that you can look up in the documentation, but null and cascade are kind of the things. So in other words, cascade is saying, hey, whenever the restaurant location that it's referenced to is deleted, delete this instance as well. You might be familiar with the Django admin. When you go into the admin and you delete something that has a foreign key in it, oftentimes you'll say, do you also want to delete these other things? That's what this is all about. And this on delete, you can leave it as the default of cascade or what the old default was, or you can set it to being null. And again, I will leave one of them being set to null and one of them being cascade. I'm doing this not in regards to how the actual project should be. Just keep that in mind. This has nothing to do with that actual project other than the upgrading portion. Okay, so in my search, I have those two handled. That's fine. I actually don't have to worry about migrations. Migrations are not of our concern at this point. The next one is restaurants, so the actual owner. And again, with that user class or the user model, I will say null equals to true and also on delete. And we'll say models.set_null. And again, look up the various ways of on delete in the documentation. So I'm going to go ahead and save it. And since I've made changes to models, what do? You're right. We go ahead and run migration. So python manage.py, make migrations. And we're still missing the on delete method. So it looks like I have another one. One-to-one field. Well, of course, one-to-one fields are foreign keys. So we need to go back into our project and search for 1-to-1 field. Do a quick search there, and sure enough, we've got one. And this one I'm going to leave as cascade. So on delete, it will be in models.cascade. We save that, and we run our make migrations again. And now we have a namespace issue. Yet another issue. Okay, so this I'm going to go back to my actual blog post about this. Notice that I did talk about on delete here, but I wanted to show you exactly what it does in that. Middleware classes, actually maybe we should address this first. Middleware classes and settings is just middleware now. That's a really, really simple one. So let's close out that find method and going into our settings configuration, such as base.py, it just does say middleware. So I already have that set up. I just wanted to double check that that was the case. Otherwise, perhaps we would have some other issues. But likely in Django 1.11, that was already there. But it's for sure just that now. So I think it'll give you an error if you did it any other way. So we have the URL regular expression stuff. I'll talk about that in a second, but first I'll do namespacing. So namespacing, if we go into our URLs for this, let's go into our main configuration URLs. Namespacing has to do with this, right? And which further has to do with reverse. So if we reverse something and we put the, something like the namespace and the URL name, that is how that works with namespacing in particular, not the URL name, but the namespace. So what we have to do is actually now change this to being a little bit different, but also probably for the best. Okay, so let's go ahead and go line by line with the ones that have namespace. So the very first one that I see is this one right here. Granted, Django will let me know if I ran into any errors with namespacing, so that's a good thing. But the first one is profiles.urls, and we have the namespace of profiles. So we go into the app for profiles, into the file URLs, and all we do here now is app name equals to profiles. We save that. We go back into that main configuration URLs, and we can get rid of this altogether. Now, that's not the only way to do it, but it is the way that I think is the cleanest, because now where you're doing the namespacing as well as the URL name is all in one place. So the namespace is now up here, or the app name is now up there, and then the actual URL name is here. So the reverse call is still the same. That hasn't changed. It's just how namespacing or you declaring URLs, that's the only part that has. So let's go back into that main configuration again and go down the line. The next one is menu items. So that's the namespace here. I'm just going to cut it out now and actually go to menus.urls. So menus.urls is right here. And we paste in namespace equal to that. Instead, I'll say app name equals to that. Great. And then back into those URLs again. Restaurants, that's the next one. So I'll go ahead and cut out the restaurants namespace. Don't need it there. Let's go back into restaurants, into URLs, and then we'll change it again to app name. All right. So we save that, and let's run our migrations again. Remember, we still haven't been able to run our migrations. I run them again, and success. We actually have migrations working. So now I'll go ahead and do python manage.py, migrate. I hit enter, ran the migrations. All the changes seem to have changed and made and taken into effect. So I'll go ahead and run the server now. And now the server's running. So let's go ahead and look at that. It's going to be at our regular server, our local host. We get bad request. Good chance for that. It has to do with our settings files altogether. So in my base.py, just for my own usage here, I'm going to just go ahead and put star there. And then I also want to just go ahead and copy all of this and make a new file called local.py. And this, of course, is what we do in DJANGO 1.11 anyway. We have a local file, but I actually didn't bring that to the GitHub file, so that's why we see that. But anyways, so now with that in mind, I'm going to go ahead and hit Control-C to end that server and then run the server again. I refresh in here. It looks like I'm still getting a bad request, so let's see why. From my init file, there it is right there. It's local2. So I'm just going to rename the local file to local2. Now it's going to look a lot more like what you would have seen in DJANGO 1.11. Again, I want to rerun the server and refresh. Okay, cool. So it looks like things are working. Now, one of the reasons why these settings are different than what's on GitHub is because I treated GitHub like I was deploying it, and this local file is really just based off of this base file, so we overrode things there. I do know, or I'm pretty sure that I discussed that in detail on DJANGO 1.11. Okay, so is everything done? Like if I click on stuff, I mean, it seems like it. Seems like things are working fine. The links are working, random user, register, login. I'm sure I could try these things out and see if there's any differences. And you know, there's a good chance that there probably won't be. The one big thing is actually how these URLs are imported. So right now we have it imported here. That it has changed, but it seems like the old version still is working. But if we scroll back into this blog post, we see that there's now another option for URLs, something called path and regular expression path. So we actually are going to change how that portion works. So I'm going to copy this and paste it in here. And I believe include is also in Django.urls now as well. And then every URL method that we see down here is now an RE path. So if you're familiar with what we've done in the past for URLs, you'll know that these are all regular expressions. And what the regular expressions allow to have happen is to make these a little bit more dynamic. So that's what we've got here. And since we did it here, I want to make sure that I do this in other places, in the other URL files as well. So I just, first off, going to save that one and then just restart the server to make sure that there are no errors with that. So going back in here. Okay, cool. So there's no errors with the URL. I have everything imported correctly. So now I'm just going to go ahead and import this RE path on my other URLs. So
there we go, and then we'll do it. I think we have a couple more. Okay, and I'll probably just speed through this in the actual video.
And I think that's it. Okay, cool. So we now have the RE path, the new default for our regular expression path. If you want to know about the actual path itself, I believe it's actually pretty simple, and you can just use, if you wanted to use, well, let's not do the admin. We'll just do the home page as RE path, just to give you a little bit of a sense of what's going on there. We change it from being a regular expression to simply just being, I believe, just a slash. So I could just put it in like that, and that will do it for us. So in Django, I don't actually use them, But in the Django paths, that's just another way of how to go about doing it using Django 2.0 and later. I'm pretty sure this is how they're going to stick with it. So a regular expression path is the one that I've always used, and that's the one that I'll probably use going forward because just the nature of I like regular expressions better than these simple string paths. But a lot of you might really benefit from using the string paths themselves. So, okay, cool. So let's go back into this blog post and see if there's anything else. Doesn't look like there is. Your reverse methods should still work fine. One of the things that I believe did change is that's actually the same. So I don't think the templates have any real big changes that you might need. If there are changes or there's any issues that you may have seen, please let us know in the comments so we can at least address them there to make sure that you guys see how this upgrade process works. Now, I just went through a fairly simple project. I mean, there's a lot of stuff in it, but it's not like there's 50 apps or, well, hopefully there's not ever 50 apps, but it's not like there's like 10 or 15. There's not that many apps that are controlling this project. There's just really not that much going on. And there's also one of the things that I didn't have to do was there's also not a lot of third-party packages that may not be upgraded to Django 2.0 yet. They might be, they also might not be. So that's sort of the gist of this. If you have any questions on what we did here, please let us know. And definitely please comment below if you found any errors or issues with this. And I did want to acknowledge a few of the people that actually helped point these things out on the blog post. That's Simpos and Amir.s on codingforentrepreneurs.com. Both of you guys gave a lot of great contributions to make that post better and thus making this video better. So thanks for that. I really appreciate it. So thanks for watching, and I hope you join us on YouTube for our live Q&A sessions. I try to answer all of your questions that you may have, whether it's related to Django or code. Honestly, one of the questions I get a lot is Django 2.0, so that's one of the reasons I also did this. That happened in the live Q&A. So you can join us there on joincfe.com/YouTube. Make sure you subscribe and hit that bell to get all of the notifications about any new events that may be coming.